I have the privilege of announcing Gene Case, who's the CEO and co-founder of the Case Foundation and also the chairman of the National Geographic Society. You guys know her as an actively engaged philanthropist, an investor, and a pioneer in the world of interactive technology. She's also a very passionate believer in all things digital and also the potential of technology to change the world for the better. Gene.
For more than 120 years, National Geographic has supported the people who explore our world, shared their discoveries, and joined them in seeking solutions to today's most pressing problems. Together, we've built one of the largest nonprofit scientific organizations in the world, with explorers spread around the globe, unraveling ancient mysteries, protecting wildlife and wild places, preserving cultures and languages, and tracking the forces that move our planet. As we enter this new age of exploration, National Geographic continues to expand our reach, working to find the world's leaders in science, adventure, and innovation. Together, we can shape the future and connect the next generation to the pulse of the planet.
Well, hello, everyone. Has it been an extraordinary morning or what? I don't know if you feel like I feel, but we've heard some truly awesome speakers. Now, when I come on the MCON stage, as I've done at every single MCON, including the first, where it was only at my desk at a computer, I usually am wearing the hat as CEO of the Case Foundation. But today, I'm going to speak from a little bit of a different perch as chairman of the National Geographic Society. I said yesterday when I welcomed you, gosh, we're so delighted to have you here on campus. Why? Come on, you're some of the most awesome leaders on the front lines of change yourselves. And you've come home, really, to a place that's all about that. In fact, as the slide says, for 128 years, we've believed in the power of science and exploration and storytelling and education to change the world, just like many of you. Now, this probably doesn't look like a millennial painting. This is a picture of our 33 founders in 1888. Now, doesn't it look Victorian? Don't they look kind of ancient and maybe even a little out of touch? Well, when I first saw this painting, it had an editor's note at the bottom. And the editor's note said, these subjects were painted to look older than they actually were. And I remember thinking, like, what? There has to be an interesting story there. So I spent a weekend just going to school. Who were these 33 guys anyway? Of course, I knew of many of them. Well, it turns out half of them, although they don't appear this way in the painting, were in their 20s and 30s. In fact, the youngest guy at the table was 24 years old. And really, the point of it is to make the case that, you know, from our very roots, we were investing in young people. You heard Erin talk about getting her first grant when she was 25 years old. Now, we were also born at a time that many people don't understand was a lot like how we're living today and how the world looks today. A time of tremendous disruption in society, driven by technology. Two of the personalities that many of us know from that era, Thomas Edison received his first patent at 22 as he was lighting up the world. Or our second president here at the National Geographic Society, Alexander Graham Bell, got his first patent at 29 for his work on the telephone. And by the way, you may not know it, but Alexander Graham Bell was an early social entrepreneur. What took him into sound technology was his passion to find ways to aid people who were hearing disabled. His mother and his wife were deaf. And ultimately it led to the invention of the telephone. But this is National Geographic Society today. Some of these are our newest emerging explorers, and as you can see, they don't look all that unlike the audience that I'm looking at. So as I prepared for today, and I was thinking, all right, I know before I get on stage, you're going to hear from some unbelievable explorers themselves, from some change makers doing all kinds of stuff. So what was I going to talk to you about? So I really want to challenge you today. As I stand here, I want to walk through the top 5 reasons why I believe at its heart, National Geographic really is a millennial, a 128-year-old millennial. Reason number 1, millennials dream big. They take risks, and so do we. You heard Sylvia talk about the Pristine Seas Initiative, led by our amazing explorer in residence who started here as a really young guy and still is, Enrique Sala. So that initiative has been quite powerful and has resulted already in the protection of over 3 million kilometers of our pristine seas. I had the opportunity to go on a dive with Enrique. That's me in the middle there, not one of my better pictures. But the reason I really have this in there, it's not about me. It's because on that trip, we were off the coast of Cuba a few years ago in what is one of the most pristine sites in our oceans on the globe. We had 3 board members diving 3 times a day for a week with Enrique. And when I say you come to a special place, you know, it's not very many boards I sit on where I find myself on top of the highest mountains or in the ocean floors or out in the field around the world. But that really is how we do our work. The Big Cats Initiative, protecting 7 big cat species in 27 countries. It's a simple idea, really. It's a dream that big cats will be part of our planet in the future. Or the Photo Arc by Joel Sartori. I don't know if any of you had the chance to be here at headquarters when we featured Joel's work in our museum. Really, it has a very simple goal to document every species in captivity. So far, he's documented over 6,000, and he's about halfway there. He says his idea really is to get people to care while there's still time. And these are just some of his images. As I said, there's over 6,000 of them. You can go to his website, download them for yourself. What may not be obvious in these images is that many of them are endangered or critically endangered. And that's why Joel is doing what he's doing, and that's why we're backing Joel. So we think millennials believe in open collaboration and that it leads to learning and really to taking action. And isn't that what this whole conference is about? Turning interest into action? Well, so do we. So this is just an array of different programs and activities and engagements that we do all year long all over the world at National Geographic. The BioBlitz happened just a month ago. It engaged over 100,000 students out on a real, like a science field day, a hands-on experience, and they were inventorying the species in their own local communities. We take people to the front lines of unknown places. This is Antarctica. Our National Geographic expeditions takes thousands of people each year out across the world to learn about our planet and hopefully to leave then and to take action. This is GeoBee. 2.5 million students participated from over 11,000 schools. A 12-year-old one with a question I must tell you I wouldn't have been able to answer. And I've got this slide in here because we're seeing a whole new sort of era, if you will, in exploration. It is this whole sort of open and shared learning. This is called an open ROV. And it was created by one of our emerging explorers, David Lang, who is a millennial himself. Think of it as a low-cost underwater drone. He's married that with a website called Ocean Explorer, in which he invites everyone around the planet to become explorers. Go underwater using, today it's a $1,500 device, which sounds like a lot, but is dramatically less than the typical subs or different technologies that have been used to go underwater. And his goal really is to get it down to a price where it can be available to the masses. And the idea of the Open Explorer website is that everybody gets together and shares their ideas and shares their explorations with one another. So millennials believe in technology and innovation, and I just talked about one, and so do we. So this is Brian Christie, and the issue of elephants was raised earlier. Brian runs the Special Investigations Unit here at National Geographic, and he's on the track of ivory poachers. He cares deeply about the plight of our planet's elephants. You heard Raj mention them in his talk. To put it in sort of annual numbers, if you will, we're losing about 30,000 a year. That's a pretty shocking number, but what makes that more shocking is that it's estimated there's only about 350,000 elephants left on the planet. So it's an urgent problem. So you're probably thinking, well, why are elephants in the technology section she's talking about? Well, Brian came up with a brilliant idea, and he posed it to National Geographic and got our support. And the idea was, what if we could create fake ivory tusks, put them into the illegal trafficking network with a GPS inside, and track where they go? And that's exactly what he did. And as a result, for the first time, that network was uncovered, actually proving it's a huge network of organized crime and terrorism around the world. But the more important thing about the technology is not just that it identified a network, but now it's leading to all kinds of new action, including a bill that was passed by Congress last week, and out across the states, citizens are galvanizing now that they understand the problem. This is Jedidah Eisler. So Jedidah's work as an astrophysicist is to study blazars. Now, you might not know what blazars are, but they are basically huge, giant quasars out in the distant universe. In fact, Jedidah says in these faraway galaxies, some of them are the size of 1 billion times our sun. So these are huge things. So she's one of this year's emerging explorers, and you might imagine it's kind of hard to study faraway places without some technology by your side. This is Topher White. I love Topher's story, another millennial. So Topher was a software programmer, and he volunteers, and he ends up in Borneo in the rainforest. And boy, he loves the sound of the rainforest, which can be deafening if you've ever been in one, with all the sounds of the creatures. He loves the density, trees everywhere. But he discovers one thing. There's something alarming going on. There's illegal logging taking place. And the problem was, you can't hear it in many cases because the rainforest sounds, and you can't see it because the rainforest is so dense. So he came up with this innovation, which basically takes recycled cell phones up on the trees, attaches a special microphone and some solar panels, and now it's an early warning system for the rangers. So the saws can be heard, and they can go right to the site and intercept the illegal logging activity. Topher, to me, is a great example of the kind of innovative work that we've been funding for 128 years. Sarah Parcak, maybe you've heard of her. She won the TED Prize this year, $1 million prize. Sarah is called a satellite archaeologist, a title that you probably wouldn't have heard, say, 10 years ago, because it didn't exist. She uses satellite technology to uncover things beneath the surface. So in Egypt, for instance, she has discovered 17 new pyramids that, well, they're not new pyramids, there's a new discovery of old pyramids that are under the fields and under the sands of Egypt. But her real goal is to protect the cultural heritage of our planet in so many places, and she invites citizens to be a part of her work. Reason number 4, millennials like to share, and so do we. So this is the cover of one issue of National Geographic magazine in 34 local languages. So we don't just like to share, we like to meet people where they are, talk to them in their language, and understand their own issues. Our social footprint, we're the #1 brand in social media. You heard Raj talk a little bit about that this morning. We're bigger than the NFL, we're bigger than Coca-Cola, we're bigger than a lot of things. And you heard us tease yesterday, we're not yet bigger than Kim Kardashian, but she's in our sights. And again, you heard Raj talk about the importance of one photograph. Paul Nicklin is a celebrated photographer here at National Geographic, and he's really using the power of photography to get people engaged in the issues we care about. Reason number 5, and most important to me, millennials, many of you, are changing the world, and so are we.
You can see the skull here. That looks fantastic. You got the fossil, huh?
Yes, yeah, the fossil.
There are inscriptions right here.
There are?
Yes.
Wait, what did you find?
We found a biofluorescent turtle.
So I leave you with one not so small request. Be bold, take risks, be fearless. Let's explore together and let's go change the world. Thank you very much.
Have a seat here. Thank you. You know, people talk about investing and philanthropy. This is, I always tell the gang here when they put this together, it's one of my favorite conferences because...
Me too.
You love it, right? It's just such incredible people, young people, millennials. Why are you so passionate about investing in millennials?
Well, you know, our work on millennials goes back so many years that people really hadn't fully adopted the term millennials yet. And in fact, I still have this love-hate relationship with the term millennials because too often we know it puts people in a box. But there were some really common traits that jazzed us right from the start. And what we discovered was, hey, like so many young generations, millennials are idealistic. But we saw something really different happening here. They were turning their idealism into action in a very real way, in the way many of you are, and that's a big part of the reason that you're here. So we did our first paper in 2007 called Social Citizens, where we were beginning to track and tell the story of millennials and their passion for social good. And that really was our toe in the water. And then I mentioned yesterday, we turned to Derek Feldman, who is the founder of MCON, and Dream Big Dreams Together, and he said, well, wow, could we actually maybe do an annual gathering? And then that really took us even deeper into the work. And so every year, as many of you know, we have funded the work of the Millennial Impact Project, which tracks different things that are happening, behaviors and perceptions of the generation through time.
I was fascinated. I was reading it last night in my hotel room, and it's really worth taking a look, looking at this generation. I want to also ask you, you use this phrase at the Case Foundation, be fearless.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, it's interesting because we work in what's called the social sector, and a lot of what we're talking about here on this stage is about the social sector. And to define that, that's really, the sector that finds and funds change the world kind of stuff, okay? Usually when we think about it, it includes philanthropy, nonprofits, governments, and, think tanks, et cetera, out there. And when I came out of the private sector, I had a career in technology, and as I came out of the private sector and went into this social sector, we began working with nonprofits, trying to fund them, et cetera. And what we discovered was many in philanthropy and many in the nonprofit sector really had great ideas, but in some cases they were afraid to take the risk of investing in those ideas. And for a really good reason. This is a dynamic in the social sector, and I understand it at a very human level. And that is that too often they're spending someone else's money. Mm-hmm. So think about the government. That's taxpayer money. If they take a risk, that's called, fraud and waste, okay? Yeah. Think about the nonprofit sector. They're getting grants. The last thing they ever want to do is end up looking stupid in front of the people that fund them. And in philanthropy, there are many older foundations that really are protecting someone's legacy, protecting the name of someone. So they really don't want to, mess with that either. So there's really good reason. And I often describe it as, okay, if I was spending my $100, I could get all wild and crazy with that and take risks. But if I'm spending your $100, I'm going to get pretty conservative because, I don't want to do anything stupid with it. So as we discovered this, we hired a firm and we said, look, there have been some tremendous breakthroughs in time. What do those look like? And how can we sort of be informed by that and then share that with the sector? So out of that was born this work, Be Fearless. And it's a series of principles, really, that have proven to be present wherever there's transformative breakthrough change. Mm-hmm. And part of it is dream big, take risks, accept that failure is an option. When you fail, fail fast and fail forward. Mm. Have a big collaborative table and let urgency conquer fear. And hopefully in a lot of the work that you just saw and that you've heard about this morning, you've seen a lot of those elements at work. And so we've spent, gosh, I don't know, we've actually probably not counted, but I'm sure over 500 dialogues across the sector trying to share this work and learn from the past in terms of what has led to transformational breakthrough, which is what I think we all want if we're in the change the world mode.
What does it mean? You said fail forward.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, I think at the end of the day, the reason people don't want to take risks is because they don't want to fail. And, the bottom line is nothing great has ever come out of playing it safe. Nothing good comes from the comfort zone. Really, to break through and to make big change, you have to get into a pretty uncomfortable place. Now, what I talk to when I talk to older, venerable organizations out there who are not comfortable with risk is, hey, one way to de-risk risk is to think of it as R&D, because at the end of the day, that's what it really is. And the social sector should be first in line for R&D because there are so many daunting challenges out there. We need to be constantly trying new things. And I think it's one of the reasons I feel so privileged to be associated with the National Geographic Society, because really, as you've tried to see displayed here in the various talks you've seen, et cetera, from the very beginning, National Geographic was funding the wild and crazy ideas that ultimately led to seeing our planet differently and helping to protect it and inspire others to do so as well.
A question here from the audience. Can one affect more change as a nonprofit or a for-profit for good? Do you need money to make a difference?
You need, in most cases, to start with a really good idea. You probably are an awesome leader if you're in this audience. I spent a lot of time teaching in business schools, and that question, it's like clockwork. I can almost tell who's going to ask it. I have this idea. I don't know if it should be a nonprofit or if it should be a for-profit. You know what? That's a tax status. That really is. Mm. The main thing is to make sure you have an awesome idea, an awesome team, and a path to funding that will allow you to be sustained and hopefully scale with a really big idea. Mm. So it really is, and I think National Geographic is a great example of that. I call it the oldest social enterprise because 128 years ago, they had a mission, right, to increase and diffuse geographic knowledge. And what they did was they took that very mission and they built a business off of it, of what became a monthly magazine, and then became television programs, and then became a cable channel, and today is digital programs as well. And the money made on that side of the house, which is all about driving mission and informing people about the mission, comes back over to fund continued work. So I think we're going to see more blended and hybrid models. And today I would say it's less about whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit, but what is your sustainable business model? What is your proposition?
That's a good point, sustainable business model. What can you tell us? How does National Geographic plan to actually engage in current social and activism and justice issues and more than just conservation and history?
Yeah, well, I think after hearing things this morning, if you don't have the clear understanding that our explorers are everything from social scientists to computer engineers to people on the front lines of the unknown or big challenges on every front. So we're not really just about the natural sciences. I think particularly since our emerging explorers came in, which are almost always from the younger generation, the field has broadened even more. But really all through time, if you follow what we've done, we've always been on the front lines of all of the categories of challenge that you just talked about.
There is...
I mean, sorry, Rena, but if I can, interject. One thing to go look at is, why don't you look at who received some of the earliest National Geographic grants? Some of these were young women before anyone was investing in women in science. Some of these are Africans and people from places that just weren't even making it onto the radar screen of funding here in the US, but National Geographic was by their side. So while, it might not have been bannered under social justice, it was the real deal of social justice by investing in them and helping them be successful.
Why do you think they were able to get that funding?
I think if you have a really great idea and you can prove that it can change the world, or the idea that it can change the world, we're going to listen carefully. I think that we have awesome teams here that are out in the field around the world, and it's part of the reason we were so excited to have all of you with us, who are out in the world and trying to look at the landscape. Who's out there? What are the big issues of our time? Who's doing some of the most innovative work?
I want to close by asking this question from the audience. What advice do you have for millennials who might not feel like they have the ability or luxury of failing at work?
So I'm not sure you can achieve the success you dream of if you don't risk failure at some point. And I say this to you, and I think too often we do a disservice if we're not in the younger set and we're in front of them, and we don't share with them some of the own risks and failures that we've been through. I wish I could say there's a perfect path to success without failure, but it's not very common. I mean, I just talked about, some people that we associate with great success. But you know what? There would be no Thomas Edison, no Alexander Graham Bell. Really, even our current modern, look at Elon Musk, a current example of, some people are calling him our current Thomas Edison. He fails routinely, and he owns up to it because he knows it's going to take failures to achieve and find success. So if you're worried about that, have a conversation with who you work with. Talk about the fact that you think to innovate, to break through, or to do something that you think will add more value at the end of the day, this is what you might want to do, and do they have your back if it doesn't turn out? Those kind of dialogues and clear expectations often go a far way.
I've often heard people say that failure is a wonderful motivator.
It is. It is. Albert Einstein said, failure is success in progress. But we just don't think of it that way.
That's so true. Before I let you go, truly my last question. While we have you, it's hard to let her go. We have her on stage.
Fire away, I love it.
What would you say was your biggest failure in life, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, I get asked that a lot. And one thing we try not to do, we have 5 kids. And so one thing we try not to do is put our family life out on display. So I try to avoid talking about personal failures. When I'm with students, I do. And in fact, when I open, I said, adults often don't talk about their failures. They'll read a very illustrious intro of me, and then I will read my own failure introduction in which I walk through my many and different failures. But we've had many of them, and we actually, today at the Case Foundation, before we really get engaged in big initiatives, we have a kumbaya moment in which we commit publicly to share what happens as a result. We've done this time and time again. Our Clean Water Initiative across Africa is probably the bright, shining example of that ultimately we failed forward and we found a better way forward, but we were very open and honest, and I wrote a blog called The Painful Acknowledgement of Coming Up Short. And I just laid it out there and said this, we had launched it together with Bill Clinton to one side of me and First Lady Laura Bush to the other, and it was failing. And we had a real moment of sort of moral dilemma, if you will. Are we going to tell the world? Are we going to be clear about this? Or are we going to try and sweep it under the rug or just quietly sunset it? And I think that was a transformational moment for us, which ultimately led to our Be Fearless work, is to acknowledge that it was probably in our work, we consider it one of the greatest failures, but we also consider that it was a terrific fail forward, because today our clean water initiatives that we've supported are doing remarkable things all over Africa.
Clean water, the Arctic, the LGBTQ community, that was a fascinating point. We've talked about so many things today. A big kudos to you for supporting millennials and this conference and what this group stands for.
Thank you, Rena. And I'll just say one more thing. I often tell audiences who want to talk about those millennials, I say, hey, you know what? We could all just get out of the way. They've got this, right? I think what a lot of us are trying to do is just come alongside and maybe be a little jet propulsion to help you get further faster with the great ideas that all of you have and that you're trying to take forward. So thanks for what you're doing.
Thank you, Jane.
All righty.